Ged, can you tell me a little bit about how the biodynamic style of training that you're teaching around the world is different from the slightly more biomechanical craniosacral work that's also being taught?
Yeah, sure. I think some of the main differences are to do with the practitioner's intentions. So there's a huge orientation to health that's part of it, which means that you're not, as a practitioner, so interested in condition. So you don't have a pathological mindset. Your initial intention around the first contact is to listen for the health, listen for the underlying health of the body, and to relate to the power and vitality that's in the body tissues. And I think that produces a very interesting result. The body starts to respond from quite a different place. That's a very different approach than looking for what's wrong or looking for areas of restriction, and that's all you see. So the biodynamic approach is very interested in forming this relationship to the underlying health. So the first thing you'll do is listen for that, and there's hallmarks of the biodynamic expressions that you get used to as a therapist, and that are movements of health. And that creates a ambience in the session where you're allowing the breath of life, the body intelligence to surface and to bring about changes that are way more intrinsic than the other approach, which is to look at the body in terms of restrictions and then go to a restriction and have an intention of bringing about a change through using some specific intentions around that collection of tissues and fluids. So that's a big part of my sessions, and is a big part of the teaching on the course. The other part is that there's a much more detailed look at how primary respiration expresses in the body. There's a greater look at the deeper tides, and there's a facilitation of those tides to emerge during the session, and particularly the mid and the long tides, which bring about much deeper change and take something that's reorganised at a tissue level into a whole system shift through all kinds of layers, through the mind and the emotions, and there's a new state of energy and vitality reached at the end of the session. So I think my background has been to treat more mechanically over my 18 years in practice, and what I've seen, and I guess what a lot of other biodynamic teachers have seen, is that using this approach actually produces greater therapeutic effects. The treatments go deeper, they do go faster, and there's an integration which allows change to stay. So people don't come back and things are reverted to the original pattern. I mean, that's very exciting in any therapy, and that's an exciting process to observe. So I think whereas it might take me 10 sessions around a particular issue for somebody 10 years ago, working in a more mechanical approach, these days it takes 1 or 2 sessions. And that's down to the intention that I'm holding as a practitioner, which is an intention of possibility. I think there's a sitting and a waiting for the body to show itself to you, to present what its priorities are, to present that to you in a huge stream of information. So a lot of the approach is to wait, be patient, to create this relational field that's very common in the biodynamic teaching, and there's a great deal of detail goes into that. So there's a precision of how to be present with somebody, which just is not there in the more mechanical approaches. Yeah, that's part of it, I think.
So I think it could be interesting to chat a little bit about how a patient coming in might feel different in a biodynamic session compared to, again, a more biomechanical craniosacral session. And that's something that's quite powerful because it really differentiates the treatment. And then from a practitioner perspective, it's interesting to know actually that there is a difference in how it will feel as well as the results that a patient will get. So could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. I assume that most people would notice the difference, primarily being that the biodynamic practitioner doesn't seem to do anything and is quite static, and maybe there's just one or two contact places. Lots of biodynamic therapists I know might not even move from the feet, so tends to be a lot less busy in terms of meeting the body at different places, and it can be a very, very different session. I think there's a huge fluid experience in this work for clients and practitioners. So there'll be perhaps a series of tissue shifts and changes, and then there's commonly a sinking down, a settling into a fluid space. Now that does feel quite different, and I think most clients would be able to say, hey, this is quite an unusual space here, and I feel a lot more whole in myself. I can get a sense of whole body awareness. I get a sense of interconnectivity through my body. I'm more aware of the space around me. So there's the client is experiencing bigger perceptions of themselves. The practitioner is doing just the same, because I think there's a co-experiencing a lot of the time. So the practitioner will be feeling those things too, and often people, it depends on the level of health and what's possible in the system, but dropping into a long tight space is a very powerful experience. I mean, there's a deep settling in the body. The mind really stops. I think thinking tends to die away, and there's quite a deep meditational state achieved in that, and people's aliveness becomes so much more greater. There's a sense of all the body tissues as being very revitalised. There's a tingly feel to it. People feel quite light and floaty, and that's something that I don't think comes through when there's a more of an adjustment oriented approach.